Hey guys, so we are going to begin topic C5, which is population ecology. Population ecology is basically concerned with factors that influence organisms' populations and how we obtain those numbers. Now keep in mind that a population is defined as the number of organisms of a species in an area. So when we're talking about population, we are usually talking about, a specific area rather than the whole population of that organism worldwide. So we will talk about some techniques for how to calculate population. Okay, so I want you to read and consider C.5.1. That's the understanding that we'll be covering in this video. And also I want you to think about, back to our previous notes, we have actually learned one other method for estimating population, and I want you to remind yourself what that is, and also remind yourself why we estimate population rather than counting every individual organism. Okay, so hopefully when you thought back to our previous notes, you remembered that we have found or used a method for estimating plant populations, and I'll let you go back and figure out exactly what that is. But right now I want to teach you a method for estimating mobile organism populations, and it's called the mark-release-recapture method, or the Lincoln Index. This method is used to estimate population size, like I said, for mobile animals. And so because animals are moving, because they may be very numerous, because they may be hard to see, again, we have to estimate population rather than actually counting. So the equation shown here is the equation that you will use to estimate animal population size. And I'm going to tell you what each of these variables means. So N1 is the number of organisms caught in the first sample and marked. Okay, so basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out, I'm going to actually capture as many organisms as I can in a set period of time, and I'm going to mark them in some way. And however many I catch and mark, that number represents N1. N2 then is the number of organisms caught in the second sample. Okay, so those organisms that I caught for N1 are marked and released. I wait 24 hours, and then using the same method and the same rigor, I'm going to go out and I'm going to collect as many organisms as I can again. This time I'm not going to mark them, I'm just going to count them, and that number is going to be my N2 value. Lastly, you need N3. N3 is the number of organisms that were caught both times. Okay, so what that means is any organism that was caught in the N2 sample but that already had a mark on it will be considered in the N3 value. Okay, so I mark them, that's N1, and then release, and then recapture, which is N2, and then multiply those numbers together and divide by the number that were caught in both samples. And this will give me an estimate of population size. Now, some things to keep in mind with this method. In order for it to work, organisms need to survive to be recaptured. So for example, capturing methods must be careful. They must not harm the organism in any way. As well, the marking technique needs to be, you need to be thoughtful about your marking technique. You don't want to make the organism more susceptible to predation through this marking. So you may want to mark them in a more discreet place, or with a color or a marking that is a little bit less obvious to predators. So Lincoln Index is a method that we'll use in class to estimate population. As well, if you are going to Newport for your field trip, we will be using the Lincoln Index to estimate snail populations. An important example of using population estimates in the real world is estimating population of commercial fish stock. Commercial fish stock are those fish that are used for human consumption. And the interesting thing about fish stock is that saltwater fish, ocean-dwelling fish, are some of the only animal populations that are a shared food source internationally. And so counting these fish, controlling, monitoring, governing the use, the catching, the killing of fish is really, really difficult because so many nations must be involved and must agree on the practices being implemented. So accurately estimating fish stock is a really important first step in monitoring fish mortality and whatnot. So a couple of the methods that are used, one is called fish mortality. This is reported by commercial fishers, and it's the proportion of fish stock taken by the commercial fishers. So for example, let's say that a commercial fisher catches 100 tuna, but only 75 are large enough to keep. So that fisher is going to report that they kept 75 out of 100 tuna that were caught. So that number tells us how many fish died. Okay, those are the fish that were taken, and then how many were released back. Another piece of info would be spawning stock biomass, and this is the total mass of mature fish in the population. So again, this data may be collected by commercial fishers, it may be collected by biologists, but mature fish, that means fish that are of reproductive age. Any that are caught are weighed and their mass is reported. Another method is by calculating or collecting data on recruitment. Recruitment is the number of young fish that survive to spawning age. So again, this has to do with fish that are caught that are at reproductive age versus fish that are caught that are younger than reproductive age. So you can see what is the proportion between spawning and non-spawning stock. If we have more non-spawning stock, that may be good for the future. However, if those fish are not making it to spawning age, then that could indicate a potential decrease in population. And then lastly, information can be gathered about landings. And landings is the total annual tonnage of fish landed by commercial fisheries. And this doesn't necessarily mean the number of fish that are taken. This is simply the total mass of the fish caught, whether they were big enough, the right sex, the right type, whatever. This is just saying, this is how many tons of fish were caught annually. Okay, so like I said, this information is really important to many, many nations, and so there's a lot of people involved in collecting this data. First of all, we've got market sampling, and I've kind of already talked about that a lot, but this is where fish that are landed are measured for length and age so that their population can be estimated. This can be done by biologists or it can be done by commercial fishers. And just for interest's sake, the way that you measure the age of a fish is actually through the inner ear otolith. And this is a structure that will only become visible on the exterior, it is visible on the exterior of immature fish only. So if the inner ear otolith is visible, then that fish likely has not reached spawning age. Discard sampling is also a possible way of collecting data. Again, this is going to be biologists or commercial fishers. This is taking the mass of fish that are caught and then discarded so that there's information about fish that are actually out in the wild because they have not been caught and taken. And then lastly, we have just research vessels that are out there with their primary purpose being to collect population and fish health data. They use sonar technologies for different surface species. They may use trawling methods for some of the bottom dwellers, netting, and other methods that allow them to estimate biomass. This information can then be used to set standards for fishing around the world. Alright, so last thing, because fish are crucial to so many human populations, populations need to be monitored. So what happens is there are different countries that get together and set what's called the maximum sustainable yield. The maximum sustainable yield is the maximum average catch a stock can sustain over a long period of time. So this is looking at the total population for some species of fish, deciding how many can be caught each year, and then dividing that up among the nations that are actually exploiting that population and taking from that population. So as you can imagine, there's probably quite a bit of tension and fighting that goes on over this. There's also probably quite a few countries that don't exactly follow these protocols because the numbers are based on, population of that country. So it's kind of interesting to think about, the economic influences and things that would play into deciding what country gets to fish what fish and how many and all of that good stuff. So the rest of this topic, we're going to be learning a little bit more about what to do with this population information and how it could possibly influence change. Please write down any questions you have and have a great day.